Hi, I'm Ms. Nelson Kaufman, and I want to thank you, first of all, for coming to speak to our ninth graders about your experiences during World War II. The students are going to come up and they're going to be introducing each of you, and then we're going to open the floor up to questions and comments. So feel free if you have anything to say that you want to add to a question that's been answered. We just would like to kind of a roundtable discussion for you to hear each other's stories about what happened during World War II and what it was like. Because for many of our students, this is just stories in a textbook, but you are the real living examples of what it was like back then. So thank you so much.
Is this a mic for us here?
Yes, and that sound should work with the microphone just there. I don't think we need to move it, but Andre is our very capable cameraman. So if we need to move it, we will do so. But we're going to try to leave it there and see how it goes, because he's got a headset so he can hear how good the sound is. Who's going to start us off?
I'll go first.
Okay, first up far left, yes.
Hi, my name is Nick Bertrand, and my group of Matt Stefanowitz and Marcus Pagan, we have interviewed Mr. Bob Fournier over there.
Yeah, louder.
We interviewed Mr. Fournier over there. He spent 2 years in the Navy. He joined when he was 17, and he lived on the destroyer for a year. And his job was the yeoman, if I'm pronouncing it right. And it was more like the record keeping, and he was a very good typer, so that's how I got the job. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Samantha, and the gentleman that we interviewed was Mr. John Morris. And as of right now, he's 95, and he went to Yale University and graduated in 1941. And the next day, he signed up for the Navy. He was first stationed in New York City, and he fought in the Pacific. He did navigation on the ships, and he has 3 kids. And then after the war, he went to the University of Virginia to get his lawyer's degree on the GI Bill.
Hi, I'm Tamara, and Jordan and Deanna and I had Miss Jones Sarita. She was originally from Ottawa, Canada, and when the war began in Canada, which was in September 1939, she lived in Toronto. She was in 4th grade when the war began, and she was 15 when it ended. And she was a teacher in Bloomfield for 33 years.
Hi, I'm Cameron. Victoria, Michael, and I had Mr. Robin. He was drafted into the Army when he was 18, and he is from Providence, Rhode Island.
Hi, my name is Nia, and I worked with Halen Valley and Sarah Clark, and we had Mr. Tom Jackson. He is from Long Island, New York, and he enlisted in the Army in 1942. He's a cryptographic technician, and he worked in war codes. That's what cryptographic technicians do. He was an English major at Rutgers College in New Jersey, and he went to clerical school in South Dakota. He traveled to New Jersey, South Dakota, Nebraska, Iran, Morocco, and more. Please make him feel welcomed.
Hi, I'm Brianna True Bryant, and I had Miss Catherine Daly. She was a nurse in the war. Her mother was a nurse, and that's how she got into becoming a nurse. She was in school. She was a younger high school when she started, and she got up into the nursing thing and profession. And then once the war started, she was shipped out with other women and started becoming into the whole nursing field. She went into college when she was 40 years old after her children had went into high school. Please give her a round of applause.
Hi everyone, I'm Abby Bray, and I was in a group with Allie Bray and Sarah Gendro. and this is William Legro. He lived in Massachusetts, and he graduated college in 1942, and the same year he joined the Army Air Corps. He was a navigator of a B-24 Liberator. He flew 30 missions. His base was in England, and the longest mission was from there to Berlin, and he was given the Distinguished Flying Cross. Make him feel welcome.
So students, we're going to ask you just to come up to the mic and remember to speak nice and loudly because this mic is not amplifying, it's just tied into the camera for sound, so you have to speak up. And Megan's going to start us with the first question, but I'd like someone to be lined up behind her ready to go with the second question so we can just keep asking questions and keep the conversation flowing.
Hi, I'm Megan Coughlin. My question is, what was your most memorable experience during World War II?
Closer to the mic, please.
Okay. What was your most memorable experience during World War II?
What was the question?
What's the most memorable
Experience.
experience that you had during the war? Is that, I guess that's
So
it.
would you like each of them to answer that question?
I guess.
Okay.
Most memorable experience I had during the war.
Yeah.
Is that directed at me?
Directed at everybody. Anybody can answer.
Oh,
All right,
is
well-
it at everybody, Wendy? I can answer that. The very first night that that the war was declared, that was in September 1939 in Canada. That was the same day, or perhaps the following day, that Great Britain had declared war against Germany. And I remember waiting to hear the news on the radio with my parents, and I remember being absolutely terrified.
Let me answer that question a little bit differently because several of you asked me what would have happened if America hadn't gone into the war. And before the war, there were the draft passed Congress by only one vote. And that meant that there were a lot of people in this country who were not ready to go to war. Thank God it passed by that one vote, because that was very important. And I remember that there were a group of very intelligent men called the America Firsters, and they didn't believe one of them was
Charles Lindbergh.
a classmate of mine, Kingman Brewster, who was later president of Yale, and he was an America Firster. And I do remember a story that one person at Doncaster told me once, that they were sitting and listening to the radio that afternoon of Pearl Harbor Day, and he'd been talking all along about why we shouldn't go into the war, and then the announcer came on with Pearl Harbor, and he shut up and never said a word the rest of the day.
Yeah. And I remember that Canadians were really relieved that, I hope you can understand, but we knew that we were losing. And that, that the British Empire was really going downhill, and that we couldn't continue alone without America's help. So when Pearl Harbor happened, I remember there was a sort of an undercurrent of general agreement, relief, that now the United States would finally enter the war. And I know that Roosevelt was very strongly in favor of helping Churchill and the Allied forces.
I think one of the things I remember well has really nothing to do with my being in the Army, because I was slightly wounded and was sent back to the United States from Europe on a ship that was outfitted In other words, it might have been a tourist ship at one time, but the Army took that ship over and used it as a semi-hospital. And my experience on that ship was a fantastic experience. You got to remember, just about all of us were kids, 17, 18-year-olds, 19 the most, and I would never have met the kind of men I met who were on that ship going back home. And the thing that I did like about this whole situation was, war, as you heard many times, I'm sure, war is hell. But nevertheless, when it was over, guys like the ones I'm telling you about who were on the ship, and myself, we had the opportunity to take advantage of a bill called GI Bill, and that's something that I don't think we ever had before. And kids like me, I had good grades in high school, and there was no question I could go to college, paid for by the United States government. And when you were ready to buy a house, you would get what we call a GI loan, where again, the government would guarantee. So that's the contrast. And of course, I feel pretty strongly that the GI Bill should have stayed in the books, and we wouldn't be facing with a terrible situation of college costing $50,000 a year.
What is the question? One of my most memorable experiences was being. Go ahead.
You're okay. You can go ahead.
Was being seasick. You've ever been seasick before? Then you know what I'm going to be talking about.
Yeah.
This ship was the ship that I was seasick on, and I'll never forget it. It has no stabilizers like they do on the cruise ships. You know, if you're ever on a cruise ship, you don't even know you're on a ship, but you know you're on a ship here because you're going like this and this. I was so sick, I wish I was dead. That's how bad it was. I'll never forget, I was laying on deck and the waves were sweeping me back and forth, and if I got swept overboard, I wouldn't have given a darn. That's how sick you are. But fortunately, you get over it. And that's something you don't want to go through.
The old saying is that first you're afraid you're going to die, and then you're afraid you're not.
Exactly, he hit it right
I
on
got,
the head. It's awful.
I was skipper of a small subchaser, and we were in the Gulf of Mexico, and I got seasick from the chop there. And one night, the officer of the deck called me up on the bridge to approve what he wanted to do, and I looked at him and I changed it to something else, and then I ran over to the and he looked at me and decided he'd better take charge. And then at the rail there was a brand new young apprentice seaman also being sick, and he looked at me, and when he saw the skipper being sick, it cured him right away.
This gentleman and I were both on destroyer. This is a destroyer. It's about the length of a football field and maybe about as wide as 3 or 4 cars. Not very wide. And the sleeping quarters are 3 bunks high. So when you turned over on your side, the guy he's on your shoulder. You didn't have much room. The living quarters, you can see that the living quarters were here and up forward, right? And dining was in here, but it wasn't anything like home. A big change from the house you left, right? Very, very.
Nothing
cramped.
about war is like home.
Nothing like war is like home. This is altogether different. But it was an experience I'll never forget.
And on board a ship, once you're cast off, the captain is the absolute boss, and that he's a dictator. And if you have a nice captain, decent captain, that's fine. if you have an SOB for a captain, it's just tough. You gotta live with it.
The nickname for these things were tin cans, right?
Well, the
They used
tin
to call 'em
cans,
tin
the
cans.
tin cans were really the older ones.
Well, that was an old one. That was as old as they get. That's at the bottom of the ocean by now. And it's sort of,
Uh-oh.
fishes are living. Okay.
My name is Brianna Bryant, and my question is...
A little louder, please.
My name is Brianna Bryant, and my question is, how did your experience during the war affect your insight on the world?
Some of those who haven't contributed yet?
Someone else?
Well, I can speak up to that. I think there were a few nurses in the war. Exactly about 350,000 nurses in the war. They mentioned the hospital ships. They had to be mobilized right away and staffed, and they were complete hospitals that could take care of any problem at all right after Pearl Harbor. About of these people, about 59,000 were in the combat zones. 16 were killed in enemy action. 70 plus were held as prisoners of war of the Japanese for 3 years. And that was no picnic. 200 died in military service. And numerous were decorated. They didn't live too long after the war. The question being, how does this change your attitude? Well, I happen to be going into training just as Pearl Harbor happened that September. And so we saw the loss of doctors and nurses in our hospital, which was a fairly large-sized hospital, diminish. And we were working long hours, supposedly 12-hour shifts, but there might be 18 hours before you get a break. And our classes were curtailed, cut short. We had to learn from the doctors and older nurses who might be left because the nursing staff was rapidly enlisting for service in the military and naval, marine, whatever. So there was a shortage in the civilian hospitals at the time. But then other ancillary personnel began to get training, and we had LPNs and aides, and the military had their nursing assistants, and things got worked out pretty well. But I think it left me with the impression that we had to be better prepared than this, with a lot more education in math and science for work in these careers in nursing or in medicine. And there had to be more. They were recruiting doctors, but it did leave a problem there that would have made a difference in our lives. But there had to be further education, especially for women. And that probably led into what your parents knew of as your grandparents, the women's movement. A lot of things developed as a result of all this. I'm very much aware of the globalization that's gone on in the 91 years that I've been around. It's something to store away, that you have to be prepared for the long haul. The world is going to change right around you, and you want to be able to keep up with it.
Very true.
Any questions?
My name is Michael Antonio, and I had a question. Since there were over 4 million people fighting in the war from America, it's can be certain that there were many different types of people with different beliefs and races and religions. How do you think, anyone, how can it be that all of these different people could band together to fight for our country? Is there a certain idea or belief do you think that these people all had that was in common that brought them together? Does anyone know?
I think we all had in common the desire to, that we knew we had to fight. But there was one thing that was a disgrace, and that was that the Navy, the only blacks in the Navy waited on officers. Yes. And that was, that really was a disgrace.
It was.
But other than that, I think we were all in it together. And I don't think there was much thought about it. I don't think there was as much, as many different, what should I say, different people from as many different backgrounds then as there is now. What is that sign, abolitionists?
We have a program at our school that works to end slavery in the world.
What'd she say?
They have a program at their school on abolitionism.
Oh.
Yeah, and they're going to be discussing it, I believe. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Samantha. I was wondering if World War II put like a halt on any dreams or like aspirations that you had, like going into the war that like you kind of had to stop and like go and like serve in the war or anything like that.
Well, the one thing that young men knew was that inevitably we would be in the war, except for those who were physically handicapped, so there wasn't much they could do to help. But in any case, it was just accepted that that's the way it was, and then the country in general, regardless of the backgrounds that they had, or their folks had had, or even going back further. Again, we knew that this war was certainly going to affect us. As it turned out, as I said before, there were also advantages for those of us who survived. But in general, it's not something that you as a parent, for example, you had to make up your mind too that it's very possible that your boy or boys will not come home.
Everybody wanted to get into the war. There were very, very few people, if any, who didn't want to serve one way or another. There was no question about that, don't you?
It's not true.
So if you tried to enlist, and if you couldn't, you felt pretty badly.
I want to give you one example of the feeling of the, I would say, average young person, as well as the adults in their lives. I had a good friend who was a table tennis or ping pong champion, and he knew he was number 14 best men's player in the United States. He knew that. And it so happened that he was drafted the same time I was, and we had to go through physical. I remember I said something about that's the only thing that could keep you out, is if you weren't physically fit or have mental problems. Well, anyway, my friends, his name was Milton, and he had infantile paralysis. What is it? Polio? Yeah.
Yeah, polio.
Yeah, and it left one of his legs a little atrophied, so his gait was not good, but he was determined, when he was in high school, for example, to play one of the varsity sports, and he was able to get around the tennis court so well that he was one of the best tennis players we had in the school. But anyway, getting back to our being in line, you didn't even have to go very forward. Milt's leg was noticed by one of the doctors, and the doctor said right off the bat, "You don't belong here. You know, you should have been told that you have this disability and we can't use you." This kid, this friend of mine, said to the doctor, "What do you mean I can't get in, come into the Army?" He said, "I'm number 14 table tennis champion in the United States, and there isn't anything I could do for the Army." They took him.
I think it's very hard for you, all of you, to understand the difference between World War II and what you hear about as wars today. It was an entirely different picture. We were fighting to save our country from Hitler or from the Japanese, and we were fighting to save democracy, and everyone was behind it. And that's what people mean when there was a famous book where he referred to it as the good war. Well, I don't think any war is good, but it was a necessary war. We had to fight, so everybody was involved, and there wasn't any question about it once we got into it. And that's a big difference from what you all are experiencing now.
A lot of patriotism. A lot of patriotism.
Yes.
A lot of patriotism, yes.
And I think that is the basic difference, that in war now, or the wars that the United States has been involved in, I think a great many people can't understand why we are possibly involved in it, except perhaps big oil interests, or there's a kind of cynicism connected with war now that the United States is involved with. Excuse me.
Bill.
He's hard. I think that people in the wars that we've been engaged in, there just is a different reaction to it by a great many Americans.
Yes. Hi. I'm Tamara, and I was wondering, how did you adapt back into life after having served in World War II?
How would you what?
How did you adapt back into your regular lives after serving in World War II?
Participate.
Well, everybody was in the same boat that was in the service. So there was, it was pretty automatic. You just did what you had to. I mean, you got out and tried to get a job. And everybody was very nice. That is to say, people wanted to do something for the veterans. It was a helpful thing. I don't believe it's like that now.
A lot of the skills that were acquired in the service, you could carry on to civilian life. And many of us did. A lot of guys in the service that were in World War II went on to be lawyers, doctors, engine chiefs, you name it. But they really succeeded there after the war with a lot of skills that they learned in the service.
I have to admit, excuse me, I have not been able to understand, to hear most of what has been said, so I may be repeating something. But I do remember that somewhere along the line, someone had a question of what is your most memorable thing regarding the war. I'd like to respond to that, and I would say that I have two. One is when the European War ended. I was in England at that time. I had finished flying my missions, but I was still in England. During the intervening time, until August, when the Japanese surrendered, I was home on a 30-day leave and was very active in trying to find a job. I just graduated from school. I also want to say that the ending of the Japanese War was for me the second most memorable thing. And I know there's a lot of controversy about having dropped the bombs, but the way that I have looked at it and my feeling is that we could have done two things. We could have stayed in the war and stayed fighting it. We could have tried to make some peace. But the Japanese, in their thinking, the military, who seemed to be running the country, said no to any surrender, and that every last man, woman, and child will fight to the death before they stop. And I am of the belief that they would have tried to fulfill that. Fortunately, the emperor looked at it from a different point of view and said, this can't go on any longer. And he made the decision that yes, there is going to be peace, and we will have peace. That's it.
After thinking it over, maybe the most memorable thing that could have happened to me was the dropping of the atomic bomb in Japan, because I was in a heavy bomb group, and the rumor was that we were going to go to Japan to fight. So I was very happy, perhaps for the wrong reason, because it was a horrible thing. But I was very happy in any case when the bomb dropped, because I knew that was going to end the whole thing and I could go home.
I know it sounds ghastly that you can be relieved to find out that that a great many people have been decimated, that a whole city has really disappeared, and yet we had been fighting for so many years and we had lost so many men and women that there was just an unbelievable sense of relief that it was finally over. We were, it isn't like the wars that have followed the Second World War, all ghastly in their own ways. But the reasons for fighting were very different. And at no point did they have the majority of Americans or Canadians or British, whatever, supporting their lead. So we often could be cynical about why we were in each one of those wars. And the men who came back from Korea, for instance, who had fought and died, or came back very injured, and injured in terrible ways because of the character of modern warfare. It was horrible for them because they came back to a country that really didn't believe that they should have even been in Korea. And so the Second World War was different because most people, as we've said before, believed in it, believed that we had to fight in order to survive. And we didn't want a Nazi dictatorship changing our world, and we didn't want to lose our democratic way of life. But these wars that have followed have nothing to do with our losing our way of life. Their reasons are much more convoluted and don't involve all of the populace. So the feelings that we have are personal relief that loved ones are still alive and coming back in these wars, but not the sense that our whole way of life, not just for us, but for our children and grandchildren, would continue to exist.
My second wife was married to a man who was a big shot on campus before he went to Korea. Was it Korea? And when he went, I guess it was Vietnam, not Korea. And for 3 years he was in the jungle with troops, and he came back a confirmed alcoholic. That's why she married me. And it really destroyed him. And again, as you were saying, there wasn't that much support for the war. It was a different picture.
My name is Marcus Pagan, and based off of the attack on Pearl Harbor, what were your feelings knowing that you could possibly get hit at home and that war could have happened in the U.S.?
What's the question?
That it would have, what's the end of your sentence, dear?
That war could have gone on in the U.S.
What would have gone on in U.S. if Pearl Harbor hadn't happened?
No, if knowing that Pearl Harbor happened, what were your feelings knowing that you could possibly get hit at home and that war could happen in the U.S.?
Well, I was personally thrilled because I was a Canadian. And I know it sounds terrible to say that, but we would have been up a creek without a paddle if the United States hadn't finally entered the Second World War. We just, in order for President Roosevelt to get the country to vote, to get Congress to agree to go to war, it took something like Pearl Harbor. So people in the British Commonwealth were very relieved, not happy that people would die, but relieved that that we'd have a chance.
Churchill was delighted, I'm sure.
He and Roosevelt became great friends.
Yeah.
I think something should be mentioned now about the fact that, in spite of the fact that the United States didn't have any battles on our own soil, or even have any of the submarine guns firing from the ocean to nearby land. In fact, as I say, but there were still many of us who were actually in the combat area and who still thought in terms of, I wonder what this is doing to my parents. Just having, in my case, not myself, but also my brother. And it happened to many families. So you just can't say, oh, we didn't know what war was. We certainly did, because of again, the business of everybody being involved. But the thing about thinking about your parents, especially since we were so young ourselves, and if you were a religious person, you could, in spite of all the terrible things that were happening all around you, you could still say, well, thank God, I don't have to worry about my parents.
If you ever happen to travel to France, Normandy, go to the American cemetery there. It's you can't. It's about what, 1,000 or more, several thousand crosses, all on this field. You just can't walk through it and not choke up. That's what we did at Normandy to push Hitler back.
In Flanders fields the poppies blow, beyond the crosses row on row that mark our place, and in the sky the lark still bravely singing flies, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Long days we lived, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, but now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our sword with the foe. To you we hand the flaming torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not rest, though poppies blow in Flanders fields.
Congratulations. That's great. How did you learn that?
I learned it when I was a kid.
Very good. Where is Flanders Field?
Hi, my name is Matt Stefanowitz, and one of my questions I had was, were any of you fighting during D-Day? And if so, what were your reactions while fighting? And if not, what was your reaction to the stories that were told about D-Day?
If not, what?
What was your reaction to what you heard about D-Day?
Well, one time I never heard a gun fired in anger when I was overseas for 2 years because I was a cryptographer, a cryptographic technician. But I did go to, what was the name of that hill in Italy that?
Oh, not Casino, not Monte Casino.
Yes, Casino. I did go to Casino about a month after the war. I mean, after it had been captured. You may be familiar. Monte Casino was obviously up on a mountain, and it took weeks, I guess maybe even months, if I recall, for the army to get through there because the Germans were firing up from this mountain and it was impossible to get past them. And as I say, about a month or two after, I visited there, and boy, there wasn't a tree that wasn't leveled in that area, and there were a bunch of busted tanks, and it was very, very upsetting, I want to tell you, to realize what had gone on there before. And as I say, I was behind the lines, so this was kind of an eye-opener for me. And I occasionally have a little picture of me and a couple of other guys sitting on a tank there, just as though we had been fighting there. And I look at that every now and then, and I think, my God, how did these guys manage to live through all that? Of course, a great many of them did live through it.
the thing about D-Day was that the weather was terrible, and Eisenhower kept waiting for better weather, and better weather didn't come. And finally, D-Day, I think, was the last possible day. According to the forecast, it would get worse. So we had to we had to land in terrible weather, and that certainly didn't help. And the Germans were right there on top of the hill. The first ones to land were the ones that were probably didn't survive. And you knew that. If you were one of the first ones in, you knew that your chance of living wasn't really very good.
Have any of you seen the movie? The title is something like this, at least. Finding Private Ryan. If you want to see a real, true portrayal of but especially D-Day, the horrible killing that went on there, and then as you remember, if you saw the movie, there were other days after that, because of the fact that this sergeant, or whoever he was who led these troops, he was determined to find Private Ryan. So you got if you ever have a chance, if you haven't seen it, to get an idea of what war was like in Europe, at least, that would be the movie to see. And Tom Hanks plays the role of the man in charge, and I like Tom Hanks.
You're right. That was good.
Hi, I'm Molly. I was wondering if any of your experiences or what you saw in the war affected the way you raised your children.
Wait, what?
Wait, what?
For any of you who have children, I was wondering if anything that you saw in the war or experienced during it affected the way you raised them.
I don't know. How do you know something?
No, I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either.
Hi, I'm Rachel Kupek, and I was wondering if you think that the American citizens also helped win the war with all they contributed to, like Victory Gardens and the Liberty Loans.
What, you're talking too fast.
Okay, sorry.
Say it a little louder.
Do you think that the American citizens helped win the war, like how they contributed with their Victory Gardens and Liberty Loans and things like that?
I don't know.
I didn't get it.
We're all done.
Okay.
Yeah, come on,
All right.
slow down.
Do you think that American citizens also helped to win the war, with their Victory Gardens and Liberty Loans?
Like what?
What did Liberty and Home do to help win the war?
Yeah.
Like what?
Liberty Loans and Victory
Oh,
Gardens.
Liberty Loans.
Yeah.
That was the first war.
Yeah. No, well, see,
And Victory Gardens?
yeah, and Victory Bonds.
Gardens.
You remember Victory
Yes.
Bonds. Did they help? I'm sure they did.
Victory Gardens.
Victory Gardens. Oh. Well, heaven knows we had one, and it was huge. Well, I think that that's an interesting question. I think all of the participation, all of the opportunities for people who weren't actually serving were helpful to, to our armed forces. It meant that everybody was involved in it. So in that way, I think it was very positive. Yeah, if you bought Victory Bonds and you tried to do everything you could to conserve, we were all involved in rationing for several years, and they were considered luxuries. We felt that we were all participating one way or another in helping our troops get home again. Yeah, I think it was helpful.
There wasn't much, you had to raise vegetables if you had any place to raise them, because with the gas shortage, you know, there was
Yeah.
the gas was rationed, and they couldn't get everything into market fresh, so Victory Gardens served the purpose. And the kids that grew up in the country were very fortunate because they had fresh vegetables all the time, and they could can things for the winter and preserve. But the kids in the city, they were in the bread lines, you know, waiting for a handout. It was very hard to get fresh food, especially into the cities with the gas rationing. That was one thing that might have been a problem. I wasn't there at the time. I was out over in England somewhere, so.
When I was
But
at
I think that was the
law school in Virginia right after the war, to buy liquor, you went to the state liquor store, and they still had rationing. And what I remember is that if you were all out of your rationing tickets, there was one thing that you could buy, and it was whiskey that was colored and flavored with wood chips, and guaranteed less than 1 month old. And if you had enough of that one night, your headache was going, whum, whum.